Thank you very much. This lecture deals with chronology. And while I was working on the Ten Duinen and Te Doest manuscripts for the Mmmonk project and another related manuscript project, I encountered large amounts of medieval dates. Most of them were fortunately very easy to solve. A number of them were more challenging and others were downright conundrums. Some of those beautiful examples of medieval dating clauses can be found in these manuscripts, and I've selected a few to show in the course of this lecture. As chronology is a highly technical topic and it has to do with numbers and lots of them, it might get a bit confusing and tricky. So I warn you, do not worry. This is often the case when dealing with medieval dates, especially on a beginner's level. I've tried to visualize the steps as much as possible. 1 hour is far from enough to teach you all the subtleties of chronology, but nonetheless, I will try and discuss the main systems and notations that were in use in the medieval manuscripts. In this lecture, I will refer several times to the work of Herman Grotevent. His Taschenbuch der Thezaitraknung is an indispensable manual with lists and tables and a great aid to medievalists. Originally published in 1898, it is still regularly being republished. A digitized version of the most important tables have been put online a couple of years ago, and I have just put a link to it in the chat for those of you who wish to browse along as I speak. The term chronology can be interpreted in two ways. The more philosophical one is how our historical counterparts envisioned time and according to what standards they recorded it. The more practical one is actually the other way around. How do we interpret these medieval notations of time and turn them into a notation that we can understand? In our society, time is omnipresent and governs every aspect of our lives. Today's lecture, for instance, started at 4 p.m. Central European time. That means that if someone looked on a clock and saw it was 3:45, they would know they still have 15 minutes before we began. Someone in a different time zone would include the difference in hours to come to the same conclusion. Same is also the case with the date. It is today December the 9th, 2022, which is a notation that each and every one of us understands. The invitation could also have said that we were to meet on Friday after St. Ambrose, in the 10th year of the pontificate of Pope Francis in the 15th Indiction. This is a correct and valid method for recording the same moment in time, although I fear that none of you would be present if we had used this in the invitation. The importance of chronology should not be underestimated. After all, datable events are the cornerstone of the historical profession, the anchor points we use to reconstruct the past. Errors in chronology can have serious repercussions. The calculation of time is almost as old as civilization itself. It was originally tied to astrology, as the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars displayed patterns that could be used to calculate the passage of time. Evidence of time reckoning goes back to the early Assyrians in the 3rd millennium BC and was further adapted by the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Greeks and Romans, and many more ancient people. The starting point of a calculation was connected to some important or well-known event, such as a natural phenomenon, think of a meteorite or an earthquake, or the ascension of a ruler or high priest. The Greeks used the Olympic Games, which were held each 4 years since 776 BC, as a framework. The Roman Republic calculated according to their consuls and later, as an empire, the emperors. The Jews calculated from the creation of the world, and this later system was taken over by the early Christian chronicle writers such as Eusebius and Jerome. While the medieval scholars lived in a totally different world than these ancient ones, they were not oblivious to the various systems that were used in antiquity, especially since the interest in this period had not waned in the Middle Ages. It was not until the 6th century that the now ubiquitous Anno Domini notation was created, and even since then it took a while to become generally accepted and used. The first thing we need to realize is what scale the author or scribe was using. Was he thinking of Anno Domini, ab urbe condita, or Jerome's chronology ab initio mundi? Depending on the type of text, these different options might be used. Sometimes simultaneously, as in this chronicle, the Fasciculus Temporum. Here, the year 5973, Anno Mundi, is equated with 774 Anno Domini, during the pontificates of the anti-Pope Constantine II and Pope Stephen III. The exact chronology is a couple of years off, but it's interesting to see how multiple calendars are being used seamlessly side by side. Two further examples illustrate the variety. The left one, the one on the top, gives the date as Anno post urbem conditam ducentesimo quadrigentesimo quarto, the 244th year since the foundation of Rome. That's to say 509 BC, according to the Ab Urbe Condita reckoning, which started in 753 BC. The lower one gives the year as the Anno sextodecimo postquam reges Romanorum regnare cesserant et bini consules fuissent, so the 16th year after the Roman kings ceased to reign and there were consuls 2 by 2. This refers to the overthrow of King Tarquinius Superbus and the foundation of the Roman Republic and corresponds to the year 493 BC. The writer of this chronicle, because these two images are from the same one, probably imitated his source, and he used a calendar style that was relevant to the period he was describing. Thus, when he narrates the birth of Christ, he uses the regnal years of Augustus, which were common then, and then switches to the birth of Christ as the new starting point of the Christian count. In the upper fragment, we read the length of Christ's life on the 5th line, 32 years and 3 months. So by the time he died, we were in the 33rd year after his birth. When the fragment below introduces St. Peter as taking up the Cathedra Sacerdotalis in the year after Christ's Passion, the scribe is fully correct in adding the marginal note that it is the 34th year since the birth of Christ, a nativitate Christi. A variant phrasing of a nativitate uses the words ab incarnatione, referring to the moment that Christ, who is of course according to Christian theology an aspect of God and thus outside time, became flesh within our own world. Of course, these dating clauses are found in specialized historical texts and were accessible to only the learned few. Most of the manuscripts that we encounter are dated according to the Anno Domini count. This reckoning was based on the works of Dionysius Exiguus, a 6th century monk. He created a table for calculating the dates of Easter to be used in liturgy, and his system was further developed by the Venerable Bede and popularized through the latter's Historia Ecclesiastica. We will start with the largest denominator of a date, the year. The main difficulty about this element is to know when the year count incremented with 1. This is called the year style. Nowadays, nearly the entire world celebrates New Year on January the 1st, but that was different in the past. There were 6 styles in use. The circumcision style, because the feast of the circumcision is being held on January the 1st, the New Year started on January the 1st. This style is similar to our own calendar and means that the date December the 31st, 1400 is followed by January the 1st, 1401. The Venetian style, because it was mainly used in Venice, started on March the 1st. So February the 29th, 1400 is followed by March the 1st, 1401. Same with the Annunciation style. March the 21st, 1400 is followed by March the 25th, 1401. Easter is a bit more difficult, and I will discuss that one in the next slides. So I will go now to the Byzantine style, where the New Year started on September the 1st. August the 31st, 1400 was followed by September the 1st, 1401. And finally, Nativity style or Christmas style is when the year started at Christmas. So December the 24th, 1400 is followed by December the 25th, 1401. When we display these styles in a figure, the variety hopefully becomes more clear. At the top, you can see the timeline of our own January the 1st reckoning, so the circumcision style, so to say, which is the one that we know nowadays. And when we calculate things to that modern style, we describe it as the new style. Below that are the 5 timelines that show the position of the years in respect to our own counting. So the year 1400 Venetian style on the 3rd row is the green beam, corresponds to our period of March the 1st, 1400 to February the 28th, 1401. Vice versa, if you were to take a random date at the top, let's say April the 1st, 1400, then we can see that according to the Nativity style, Venetian style, and Annunciation style, the year 1400 had already begun. It would take another 5 months before the Byzantine style would start the year 1400. Of course, there were exceptions. A region that used Nativity style would enter a new year 3 months before a region that used Annunciation style, respectively on December the 25th and on March the 25th. However, in the Italian city of Pisa, scholars thought this very strange. How can Christ's birth predate the Annunciation, which is the moment of Christ's conception, by 3 months? So they changed the order, and in Pisa they skipped a year, and they would start 9 months before Nativity style. This is very complicated, and luckily for us, this Stilus Pisanus, the Pisan style, never got popular outside of that city. But it shows how much variety can be found throughout Europe. Then there is a sixth style, and which I cannot put this in the schedule I just showed you. The Easter style begins each year at Easter. And as you all might know, Easter is a so-called movable feast, meaning that it's not fixed to a calendar date. It is celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the beginning of spring. That means that Easter has 35 possible dates, from March the 22nd to April the 25th. It also means that years reckoned through Easter style were not of equal length. To give an example, the Easter styled year 1399 runs in our own calendar, so new style, from March the 30th, 1399 to April the 17th, 1400. Thus, the period of March 31st to April 17th appears twice in this year, once in the beginning, once at the end. To distinguish between these two periods, the first time a date is encountered, it's often accompanied by the words post Pascha, after Easter, and the second time with ante Pascha, before Easter. The digitalized version of Grote Events, which I've shown here, has a useful calculator to determine on what date in a certain year Easter was celebrated. If you use the link I just showed you, it's under the header Tafeln, and then table number 29. If you fill in a year, let's say 1401, and you click on Julianisch, the Julian calendar, you get the correct date, April 3rd. Then if you click the link of April 3rd, then you get this schedule. You get a full calendar which corresponds with, amongst others, the year 1401. And indeed, Easter, Pascha, is on April the 3rd. You can see the 12 months at the top, plus at the left, January and February again, but for the leap years. Each yellow colored cell, is a Sunday. So if you go to St. Nicholas, for instance, feast Nikolai on December the 6th, we can see that in 1401, it was celebrated on a Tuesday. The December the 4th is a Sunday, and 2 cells down is thus a Tuesday. The calendar contains the most important feasts of the Christian calendar for easy use. Those in italics are the movable feasts belonging to the temporale and are different each year. And those in Roman are the fixed dates and belong to the sanctarale. And I will return to those later. I will now demonstrate the difficulty, the complexity of such different styles with an example, a theoretical example, of course. Let us imagine that there is a monk of Tenduinen in Flanders who has a crush on a German nun in Cologne, and the two are exchanging letters. And the monk wishes to send the object of his affection a Valentine's letter to ask her for a date, pun intended. He dates his letter to Valentine's Day 1400. In Flanders, where Tenduinen is located, the Easter style is common. That means that according to our reckoning, new style, the year 1401 had already started. But according to the Easter style calendar, 1400 will last another 3 months. The letter takes, say, 6 days to be sent to Cologne and arrives on February the 20th. However, in Cologne, the nativity style is common. So there, the year 1401 has started 2 months earlier with Christmas, and she arrives a letter which is dated in her calculation more than a year before. Vice versa, as she was to return the letter and she would date it to 1401, then the monk would receive the letter while he was still in the year 1400. So it's all a bit complicated. With the year discussed, we will now turn to the month and the day. There are various ways of presenting these elements. The easiest one is similar to ours and is shown in the example here. This is one of several dating clauses in a convolute consisting of both incunabula and manuscript units. Even more interesting is that the manuscript texts have been copied from other incunabula. So it's a very interesting manuscript. And the marvelous man behind this codex was not too shy to give us his name, so that here we have a colophon stating both the where, the when, and the who. The date is easy, February the 9th, 1475. Still, there is a slight caveat. Due to the detailed description of this location, we know that he lived in the bishopric of Tournai, and Tournai used Easter style. As the earliest date for Easter is March the 22nd, the year has not yet changed according to Easter style. Well, in our calculation, January the 1st has already passed. So we need to add 1 to the year to get the correct date, the new style. So in our modern calendar, we would say that this takes place on February the 9th, 1476, new style. The NS stands for new style or novus stilus, to show that this is the difference what we see with what is in the manuscript is due to the application of another reckoning style, rather than showing that we might make an error in reading the numerals. The other option of showing month and day is through the Roman calendar, and this one is a bit more difficult. Most of you might know the expression "beware the Ides of March," which was used to warn Julius Caesar of his impending death. In the Roman calendar, each month had 3 dates that were used as anchor points: the calends, the nonae, and the Ides. The calends are for every month the first day. The nonae are the 5th, except for the months March, May, July, and October, where they are the 7th. And similarly, the Ides are the 13th of each month, except for the months March, May, July, and October, while they are on the 15th. So the difference between the Ides and the nonae is always 8 days. To describe the other days of the month, we subtract from the first of the next of the anchor points that follows. So if the Ides of March, or the Ides Martii, means March the 15th, then Secunda Ides Martii or Pridie Ides Martii means the 14th. Tertia Ides Martii means the 13th, and so on. So the second half of the month is always described through the calends of the next month. So the Secunda Pridie Calendae Aprilis, the day before the calends of April, is March the 31st. When we apply this knowledge to the example shown to the left, which is a 15th century chronicle probably written in the Rooklooster, it narrates how the old structure of the monastery Groenendaal, Viridivalis, burned to the ground on the day before the calends of May. I've given you a small part of the Roman calendar with the months of April and May, and you can see that the day before the calends of May is the last day of April, or April the 30th. So this fire took place on April the 30th, 1435. The third option I will discuss today is the use of the Sanctorale, the cycle of days that commemorated the saints and the martyrs. Unlike the Temporale, which are the movable feasts related to Easter, all the feasts in the Sanctorale have fixed dates. St. Martin, for instance, is always on November the 11th. At the top of the slide, you can see the description as you can find it in Grote Vent. Some of the saints have more than one feast day, as you can see here as well. Of St. John the Baptist, for instance, his birth is celebrated on June the 24th, his decapitation on August the 29th, and the Inventio Capitis, the finding of his severed head, February the 25th. Apparently, it took them half a year to find it. Then there are often saints with matching names. Apart from John the Baptist, we also have John the Evangelist, and he has his feast day on December the 27th. Generally, if no further information is supplied, the most important saint of that name is meant. So if you only read St. John, then it's John the Baptist. Similarly, if no further information is supplied, the most important feast of that saint is mentioned. So if we read In Festum Johanne Baptistae, the feast of John the Baptist, we mean June the 24th, and not one of his other feasts. And In Festum Pauli is the conversion of St. Paul on January the 25th, not, for instance, the more obscure Paul, Bishop of Narbonne. To make dating notations with saints' days, we can apply a number of elements to them. The day before and the day after are known as the Vigilia and the Crastino. Cras is Latin for tomorrow, and the Vigilia is from the liturgical cycle. The vigils, which come from Vigilia, are held on the night before a certain feast, thus on the previous day. And in chronological terminology, the word's meaning was extended to cover the entire day for the feast. So the Vigilia Sancti Martini, as you can see on the slide, is November the 10th, and the Crastino Sancti Martini is November the 12th. To describe a date in the week before or after the feast, we first need to know on what day of the week St. Martin was celebrated in a specific year. For the year 1400, for instance, this is a Thursday. You can check this by using the calendar we just shown for Easter. Thus, the Saturday before St. Martin, or in Latin the Feria Septima ante Festum Sancti Martini, can be converted to November the 9th, while November the 15th, for example, is the Monday after St. Martin, or the Feria Secunda post Festum Sancti Martini. With regard to the names of the weekdays, these are numbered Feria Prima to Feria Septima. And be careful with this, the Feria Prima is the Sunday, not as we are used today, the Monday. Then finally, there is the octave. Coming from the octava die, it literally means on the 8th day. But as Roman counting systems included the day itself, as we have also seen with the Roman calendar, the term is meant to refer to a week after the feast. So the octave of St. Martin in 1400 is on Thursday, November the 18th. And the Thursday after the octave, the Feria Quinta post octavam Sancti Martini, as you can see fully on the right, is on Thursday, November the 25th. So with a single saint, a single feast day, you can cover almost 3 weeks. Now, if you need to know which saint might be used in a certain dating clause, you can find on the digital Grotevent a list with nearly all of the saints with their respective dates, and it's under the header Heiligenverzeichnis. On this slide, we can see the colophons of 3 copies of Avicenna's De Animalibus. This colophon is in all 3 identical because it was featured in the original copy, the Latin translation made at the behest of Emperor Frederick II. For some reason, it was copied in all 3 manuscripts, and worldwide there are more examples where this happened with this specific text. The way the dating is given slightly differs for each manuscript, and I've listed them on the slide in the right corner. The first one is the normal one, giving the date in Roman numerals, starting with the larger digit and ending with the smaller one. The superscript O's refer to the ablative case in which these numerals are written, as the Latin presents dates as ordinals. In reading this text aloud, one should thus say anno millesimo ducentesimo tricesimo secundo, or in English, the 1232nd year. The second notation is very rare. I have never seen an example where Arab numerals have been used before the 15th century. And the third one is a scribal error where the 200 is put in front of the 1000. So 3 manuscripts, 3 different notations. So the year is quite easy, 1232, and it's the manuscript was finished on the vigils of St. Lawrence. How do you approach this day? We first need to know on what day the feast of St. Lawrence is celebrated. Since it's a feast day for a regular saint, it's part of the Sancterale. We thus know it is not a movable feast, but it has a fixed date. When we look up Laurentius in the list of saints in Grotevent, we can see that his feast day is August the 14th. And the vigils, as I said, is the day before that. Thus, the vigils of St. Lawrence is August the 13th. Now that we know that we are dealing with a moment in August, we also know that there is no possible chance that any strange year count might be applied, because these all happen either in the beginning or in the ending of the year. Thus, the correct transcription of this date is August the 13th, 1232. A more difficult one is this. In an early 14th century copy of the Liber Extra, the decretals of Pope Gregory IX that Stephen just mentioned, this papal bull has been copied. I show you only the first and the last lines, as these contain the relevant information we need for correctly dating the document. From the first lines, we can deduce that we are dealing with Pope, as he identifies himself as Episcopus Servus Servorum Dei, Bishop and Servant of the Servants of God, which is a title reserved for the papacy. This Pope, Urban, writes to the bishops of Lincoln and London. Of course, a Google search on these elements and the first words of the actual text might already prove correct dating, but we will do it the proper way. The dating clause informs us that the bull was issued in Orvieto, Urbs Vetus, on the second day of the calends of June in Urban's second year as a pope. Well, how do we start? We cannot start with a year because there is none. There's only the identity of Urban. We know it's in the second year of Pope Urban. At the same time, we don't know from this text which Urban was involved, so what his numeral was. And the best way to do it is to start with the day and the month. Using the Roman calendar, we know that the calends of June is June the 1st. So the second of the calends of June is the day before that, which is May the 31st. Unfortunately, this is all we can say at face value. To fill in the remaining gaps, we need to resort to circumstantial evidence and go through a process of elimination. To help us with this, I have given you the dates of all the popes named Urban, which are 8 in all. Based on Grotefend, we have the date of their coronation, and I've used this to calculate the beginning and end date of their first year, then of their second year, and thus what might be the possible date of the bull. For the sake of argument, let us assume that this manuscript was younger than 14th century, let's say 18th century. The first pope that would be eliminated was Urban VII. He died in his first year, well, in fact 12 days after being elected, so he was never even coronated, and he never had a second year, so he can be discarded. Well, we know, of course, that this manuscript is dated to the 14th century, so we can the early 14th century, so we can cross off Urban's 5 to 8. The same goes for Pope Urban I. He was in office almost 4 centuries before Christianity was introduced to England, so he's also an impossible candidate. That leaves us with 3 more Urbans to deal with, and they are all theoretically very good candidates. The last piece of the puzzle that gives us information is the location where the bull was issued, Orvieto. During the 13th century, a number of popes decided to reside in Orvieto rather than in Rome due to various political reasons, and among them was Urban IV. It is, of course, not impossible that the other 2 have stayed at some point in Orvieto and then issued, coincidentally, the bull, but chances are much higher that we are dealing here with Urban IV, which means that the bull I just showed you is dated to May the 31st, 1263. The final element I would like to discuss that is the indiction. The indiction is a continuous cycle of 15 years. It's not an independent reckoning system, but rather an auxiliary element. Its origins lie in Roman Egypt, where it was used to levy taxes. People had to pay once every 15 years, and to ease the administration, regions were allocated an indiction number. If a certain region had to pay every 8th indiction, and it was now the 14th indiction, you would know again that it was that turn in 9 years. So 1 to fill up the full 15 years, and then we start again at 1 to 8, 9 years in all. This system was copied by the Byzantine emperors and later by the church, and through that route remained in use during the Middle Ages. The year 1400 had indiction 8, which means that the years 1415, 1430, 1445, and so on, each 15 years, also had indiction 8. And it can be used by us as an additional check whether the conversion of a date is correct. The starting point of a new indiction was on September the 24th. That means that if we take the indiction of 8 for 1400, this year started on September the 24th, 1399, and ended on September the 23rd, 1400. So again, a cycle with different starting date. Additional problem, since it is quite a strange system, it was not always applied correctly, even in the Middle Ages. Medieval scribes had just as much issues with it as we do, and occasionally they made errors in calculating the correct indiction. So if you have a date which in your opinions is right, but the indiction is off, and that's the only element of a date that isn't correct, then it's likely that the scribe himself made an error rather than one of you. To show how the indiction is most commonly used as an auxiliary element, I've shown here an impressively detailed example from a manuscript originally residing in Terdust. Let us examine the full dating clause. Here ends the book which Albertanus of Brescia compiled and wrote while he was kept in the jail of Emperor Frederick in the city of Cremona, where he had been placed because he had been captain of Gavardo to defend this place for the benefit of the commune of Brescia in the year 1238 in the month of August on the feast day of Saint Alexander, when the city of Brescia was besieged by the same emperor in the 11th indiction. Well, first question, why is there both a feast day and a month? Isn't that a bit too much? Well, the answer is found when browsing through Grotefend's list of saints. There are multiple saints named Alexander, and the one here is a minor one, venerated almost exclusively in the Alpine region, which is where Brescia is located. So this specific Alexander is used rather than the more common one, and he had his feast day on August the 26th. So that adds up. Then let's have a little look at the indiction. I go now to one of the tables of Grotefend. If you go to Tafeln and then number 14, you get this, this schedule, and then digitally, of course. If we look up in the vertical column on the left, 1200, and then we find 38 horizontally, then the crossing of both lines leads indeed to an indiction of 11. So we know the indiction is correct. So it's additional. A more difficult one is where we don't have additional information. And this is the case in this manuscript, which is a copy of the medical treatise De Tacrinum Sanitatis, originally found in Ten Duinen Abbey and now kept at the Grand Seminary. Again, the colophon is taken from the original manuscript and does not reflect the origins of this specific manuscript, which is a problem, of course, because we don't have additional information taken that we can take from the colloquial aspects of the manuscript. The dating clause is highly cryptical. It was written at Naples on the 2nd day of March in the 8th indiction at the behest of King Charles. Well, we know this manuscript dates from the early 14th century, so we have a terminus postquem non, and we can narrow our search down to the late 13th, early 14th century for this date. There was a King Charles I who ruled Naples and Sicily between 1266 and 1285. And in 1282, he lost Sicily during the Sicilian Vespers. So he might be a candidate. And the only other piece of information that we have is the indiction. We return to the tables in Grotefend, but now we work the other way around. The 8th indiction in the 13th century, so in the column 1200, occurred in, if you look at the left, 1205, 1220, 1235, 1250, 1265, 1280, and 1295. All the dates that are on the horizontal line. The only year that is within Charles's reign is 1280. Thus, the correct date should be March the 2nd, 1280. Causa finita est, we would say. But unfortunately, we are not there yet. There is another possible candidate for Charles, which is his son, Charles II. He ruled Naples between 1285 and 1309. Using the same method, we can discover that also the year 1295 is an option. as it has also the 8th indiction, and there's also a King Charles, although a different one. So the second possible option for this manuscript is March 2nd, 1295. Two possible dates emerge. And here, unfortunately, the value of chronology has reached its end. It is impossible for the scholar to decide. We need to find additional proof that supports one of these possibilities. With this perhaps somewhat disillusionating but realistic note, I would like to conclude this lecture. I hope that next time you encounter a dating clause in a manuscript, you feel confident enough to tackle it. And I thank you for your attention.